Under the soft fluorescent lights of the community health center, Maye Musk adjusted her glasses and glanced around the modest room. A handful of elderly attendees sat before her, their notepads filled with scribbles from today's lecture on balanced diets and managing chronic conditions through nutrition. She smiled gently as she concluded her session, her voice warm yet steady. "Remember," she said, "small daily choices build lifelong health. It's never too late to reclaim control over your well-being." The seniors offered polite applause as they gathered their belongings. Maye took a moment to help one older gentleman with his cane, offering a few more words of encouragement before he shuffled toward the exit. As the last participant left, Maye glanced at the clock. It was nearly time. She gathered her notes, straightened her navy blue blazer, and stepped out into the adjacent auditorium where the community budget hearing was about to begin. Folding chairs filled the space, occupied by residents, public officials, and members of the press. The air buzzed with quiet tension, a subtle current beneath the polite small talk and shuffling papers. Tonight's topic was no small matter. The county's annual health funding allocation hung in the balance. Maye had spent years building programs that reached the most vulnerable, low-income seniors, children struggling with malnutrition, single parents fighting to keep their families healthy. But recently, whispers had circulated about a proposed reallocation of funds. And now, it was about to be made official. On the elevated stage sat the county's Board of Supervisors, their faces composed but distant. At the center, presiding over the hearing as special counsel, sat Judge Whitaker. His silver hair was impeccably combed, his tailored suit flawless, his expression unreadable. To the casual observer, he exuded dignity and authority. But Maye knew better. Behind that practiced neutrality was a man who had built quiet alliances with private developers eager to siphon public funds into lucrative real estate ventures. As the meeting commenced, speakers stepped forward one by one. Some offered dry statistics. Others voiced polite concerns. But most spoke cautiously, careful not to offend the powers seated before them. Maye listened intently, her jaw tightening with each passing speech that failed to challenge the obvious injustice unfolding. Finally, the floor opened for public comment. A murmur spread through the room as Maye Musk rose from her seat. All eyes followed her as she approached the microphone. Though her heart beat fast beneath her blouse, her voice emerged calm, clear, and resolute. "Good evening, esteemed members of the board, Judge Whitaker," she began, nodding respectfully. "I stand before you not as a politician, but as a healthcare professional who works daily with those directly affected by these decisions. The proposed diversion of health funds into commercial real estate projects is not merely a budget adjustment. It is a moral failing." A quiet shift rippled across the room. Some officials lowered their gazes. Others exchanged brief glances. Maye continued, her voice unwavering. "Every dollar taken from public health programs translates directly into lost lives, preventable hospitalizations, untreated chronic conditions. We serve people who have no lobbyists, no influence, no voice in these chambers. If we fail them now, we sentence many to silent suffering for the sake of private profit." The tension thickened. A few members of the board shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. From his seat, Judge Whitaker's gaze locked onto her, his eyes narrowing almost imperceptibly. Maye pressed on, her tone measured but firm. "While the legality of this reallocation may not be in question, its ethical implications are undeniable. The health of our community should never be collateral damage in financial negotiations." The moderator politely thanked her for her comments and called for the next speaker. Maye stepped back, returning to her seat, heart still pounding but steady. Around her, murmurs of quiet approval mingled with the undercurrent of restrained tension. In the back of the room, Judge Whitaker leaned slightly forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. A thin, cold smile traced his lips as his eyes followed Maye's every move. "She speaks well," he thought. "Too well." As the meeting proceeded, his mind began to work, spinning threads of quiet calculation. She's intelligent, articulate, dangerous. And worst of all, she doesn't know how much trouble she's just invited upon herself. The trap hadn't been set yet. But it would be. The morning air felt crisp as Maye Musk made her way to the health center, carrying her usual stack of neatly organized files. The routine comforted her. The quiet rhythm of her work had always been her anchor, especially after everything she had survived. But that morning, the familiar comfort would not last. As she unlocked her office door, she noticed a large envelope resting on her desk. There was no return address, only her name typed cleanly on the front. Frowning, she set down her bag and opened it. Her eyes locked onto the first line of the document. Notice to appear. Municipal court. Failure to appear. Contempt of court. Maye's breath caught for a moment. Failure to appear. Contempt? She quickly scanned the fine print. The citation referenced a minor traffic violation from weeks ago. She remembered it clearly. A rolling stop at a quiet intersection near the hospital. She had paid the fine online the following day and received confirmation that the matter was resolved. But according to this summons, she had allegedly failed to attend a required court appearance related to the ticket, and now faced additional charges for contempt. Her fingers tightened around the paper as a hollow unease spread through her chest. This was not a clerical error. Someone had deliberately reopened a closed issue. And deep down, she already knew whose hand was behind it. Before she could gather her thoughts, her office phone rang sharply. "Maye, it's Principal Anderson. Could you stop by my office when you have a moment?" "Of course," she answered, her voice calm though her pulse quickened. Moments later, she sat in the principal's office across from Anderson, who removed his glasses and placed them on the desk with a sigh. His tone was measured, but his eyes revealed discomfort. "Maye, I just received a call from Superintendent Collins. Your name has come up in connection with a legal matter. Apparently, this summons has raised some concerns at the administrative level." She held up the document. "You mean this? It's a mistake, Principal. I paid the fine weeks ago. There was no court date scheduled. This is some kind of manufactured issue." Anderson shifted in his seat. "I'm sure it will get sorted out, but the superintendent is concerned that any ongoing legal proceedings could create complications for your current contract. You know how careful the board is with public perception, especially after your appearance at the town hall meeting." Maye kept her voice steady. "You mean my public comments about the health funding being diverted to real estate interests?" Anderson exhaled slowly. "Let's not pretend the timing is a coincidence. People in positions of power are paying attention, Maye. Superintendent Collins mentioned receiving complaints suggesting you've brought political commentary into your classroom discussions." Maye's jaw tensed. "I teach health and nutrition, Principal Anderson. Occasionally, that includes explaining how public policy affects healthcare access. That's not politics. That's education." Anderson raised his hands slightly, trying to remain neutral. "I believe you, Maye. I do. But certain people see things differently. And unfortunately, those people have influence." Maye's stomach sank slightly, but her expression remained composed. She thanked Anderson for his time and left the office, feeling the invisible weight of pressure growing around her. Later that day, Linda Peterson quietly slipped into Maye's office, closing the door softly behind her. "I heard what happened," Linda said, lowering her voice. "The summons. The complaints. The superintendent breathing down Anderson's neck. It's escalating faster than I expected," Maye admitted. "And it's not about a traffic ticket anymore. This is Whitaker's doing." Linda's eyes darkened. "You're right. Judge Whitaker's got a reputation, Maye. People whisper about how he uses the system to intimidate anyone who challenges him. He's deeply connected. The city council, the licensing board, donors. He doesn't need to threaten anyone directly. The system just responds." Maye closed her eyes for a moment, steadying herself. She had faced powerful men before. Men who believed their titles gave them the right to crush anyone who dared oppose them. She had learned long ago that power often wore a polite smile while tightening the noose behind closed doors. Linda studied her. "Do you want my honest advice? Back down. This isn't worth your career." Maye's voice was soft, but firm. "I can't. If I back down now, I'm complicit. And I've spent too much of my life surviving men like Whitaker." Linda's brow furrowed. "You've faced this kind of thing before?" Maye offered a small, faint smile. "Back in South Africa, before I became a nutritionist, I studied law. Top of my class. I thought I would practice, but then life happened. I married young, divorced young, and raised 3 children on my own while working multiple jobs to keep us afloat. I walked away from the law because I needed to focus on feeding my family. But that education never left me. I just never imagined I'd need to use it again. Linda's gaze softened with admiration. Maybe it's time you did. May looked out the window as the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the parking lot. The system was moving against her, calculating, deliberate. But unlike many others who had been cornered by men like Whitaker, she carried something he did not expect. Knowledge. And this time, she was not afraid to use it. The morning sky hung heavy with grey clouds as Maye Musk walked into the municipal courthouse. She carried a slim folder under her arm, her pace steady, her face calm. But beneath her measured exterior, her pulse thudded with quiet urgency. The legal machinery was moving, and she needed to see exactly how far the web had been spun. She approached the counter where court clerk Marvin sat, hunched slightly over his paperwork. The man looked up as she neared, and for a brief moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition. Hesitation. Perhaps even guilt. "Good morning, Mr. Marvin," May said politely, her voice firm but not confrontational. "I need to review the file related to my traffic citation. There seem to have been some irregularities." Marvin shifted uncomfortably. "Ms. Musk, the public records you see online are accurate to the current case status. I believe the status was altered after I paid my fine," May replied, holding his gaze. "I'd like to verify when those changes were made and by whom." Marvin's fingers drummed lightly on the desk. "Internal record changes are not typically open to public review without judicial authorization. That's standard policy." May leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "This isn't a typical case, Mr. Marvin. I'm facing a contempt charge for a hearing I was never notified about. That change didn't happen by accident. And you know that." Marvin's Adam's apple bobbed. He glanced around the office nervously before speaking. "Ms. Musk, there are people involved in this, people with far more authority than me. I suggest you submit a formal motion if you want those audit logs. That is the safest way forward." "Safe for who?" May asked softly. Marvin's lips pressed into a thin line. "I can't help you any further." May studied him for a long moment. She could see it now. His fear wasn't of her. It was of who might be watching him, who might be holding the strings. He was not an enemy, but a man trapped inside a machine larger than himself. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Marvin," she said, offering him a polite nod as she turned away. As she stepped outside into the chilled air, May pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. The system was moving with precision, tightening its grip one careful maneuver at a time. She barely had time to return to her office before her phone rang again. The voice on the other end was official, emotionless. "Ms. Musk, this is the State Licensing Board. We've received notice that due to recent legal proceedings, a review of your professional license has been initiated. This is a routine precautionary measure pending the outcome of your current legal matter." May felt the words strike like hammer blows. "My license has never been in question," she replied. "I've complied fully with all state regulations. We're simply following protocol," the voice answered. As the call ended, May sat silently for a moment. The escalation was no longer subtle. They were attacking every corner of her life, squeezing her from the courtroom to the licensing board. The message was clear: walk away or lose everything. That evening, her son Evan arrived, carrying a bag of groceries, his face drawn and tight with concern. He sat across from her kitchen table, folding his hands together, searching for the right words. "Mom, you know I support you, but we need to talk about where this is heading." May set down her tea, watching him carefully. "I know where it's heading. That's why I have to keep fighting." Evan's voice lowered. "Do you?" "Because from where I'm sitting, they're tightening the noose. First it was the traffic citation. Then the contempt charge. Now they're going after your license. You're a nutritionist, not a lawyer. These people control the courts, the licensing board, the school board. They control everything. That doesn't make them untouchable," May said quietly. Evan exhaled sharply. Mom, you raised us by yourself. You built your entire career from scratch after the divorce. You put 3 kids through college while working jobs you hated just to keep us fed. You've fought enough battles. You don't need to take this one on too. Maye smiled faintly, her voice steady but tinged with the weight of memory. Do you think I survived those years because I avoided battles? I stood up to worse than this, Evan. Back in South Africa, when I was younger, I studied law. I was top of my class. I thought that knowledge would be enough to navigate the world, but life had other plans. After your father left, I couldn't afford to practice law. I couldn't even afford to finish my articles. So I took whatever work I could to keep food on the table. Her voice grew firmer. But that training never left me. And neither did the lesson that men like Whitaker thrive when people stay silent. If I let them corner me now, what message does that send? That they can weaponize the system against anyone who dares to speak. Evan looked down, his jaw tight. I just don't want to lose you to this. You won't, she said softly. Not if I stay smart. Not if I stay prepared. There was a long silence between them, heavy with love, fear, and quiet understanding. Finally, Evan reached across the table, taking his mother's hand in his. Just promise me you'll be careful. I promise, Maye whispered. And I promise you something else. Whitaker thinks he's tightening the trap. But what he doesn't know is that I've seen men like him before. I've learned how to dismantle their traps. One careful thread at a time. The rain tapped against Maye Musk's windows as she sat at her kitchen table, the soft rhythm mirroring the relentless thoughts spinning in her mind. The walls of her world were closing in, but Maye was done waiting for the next move. It was time to fight back. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the name she hadn't called in years. Daniel Harper. Daniel had been one of her brightest students years ago, back when he was a shy young man sitting in the front row of her health and policy lectures. Now he was an investigative journalist, his bylines regularly exposing corruption at the city level. If anyone could help her peel back the layers surrounding Judge Whitaker, it was Daniel. She hit call. Daniel answered on the 3rd ring, his voice surprised but warm. Ms. Musk. Wow, it's been a long time. It has, Daniel, she said, her tone calm but urgent. I need your help. And this isn't just about me. It's about something much bigger. Daniel listened carefully as Maye laid out everything that had unfolded. The manipulated court records, the contempt charge, the sudden audit of her professional license, and the subtle but unmistakable hand of Judge Whitaker guiding it all. You're saying Whitaker is weaponizing the legal system against you, Daniel summarized. I'm saying this isn't the first time he's done it, Maye replied. And I need to prove it before he crushes me and anyone else who dares to speak out. Daniel's voice shifted to the steady tone of a reporter entering the hunt. All right. If there's a pattern, I'll find it. But I'll need access to court records, public filings, anything you've got. I'll start compiling everything on my end, Maye assured him. The following morning, Maye stepped into the quiet sanctuary of the county law library. The familiar smell of old books filled the air as she approached the front desk where Mrs. Penelope Graham, the senior librarian, sat organizing files. Mrs. Graham looked up and smiled warmly. Ms. Musk. It's been a while. What brings you in today? Legal research, Maye answered, lowering her voice. I need to review procedural statutes on contempt charges and service of summons for municipal courts. Mrs. Graham arched an eyebrow, sensing the gravity beneath Maye's calm demeanor. Trouble? Potentially, Maye admitted. And I want to be very precise in how I handle it. Mrs. Graham nodded and led her toward the reference section. Together, they sifted through dusty volumes, legal precedents, and state regulations governing proper notification procedures. Maye read through every word carefully, highlighting the gaps that Whitaker's scheme had exploited. According to Rule 7.3, service of summons for contempt must include documented proof of delivery, either by certified mail or by personal service, Maye murmured. And there's nothing like that in my file. That could be significant, Mrs. Graham agreed softly. If the record was altered after payment and no valid service occurred, the contempt charge falls apart. Exactly, Maye said, her confidence sharpening. But I need more. I need a pattern. Hours turned into days as Daniel worked from his end, pulling public court records, financial disclosures, and property filings. Late one evening, Maye's phone buzzed. It was Daniel. I found something, he said without preamble. Actually, I found several things. Go on, Maye urged. Over the past 5 years, there's a curious spike in contempt charges issued by Whitaker's court, Daniel explained. But it's not random. A majority of them involve individuals who had previously filed complaints or spoken out against city policies tied to Whitaker's financial allies. Contractors, whistleblowers, even a teacher who challenged a funding cut 3 years ago. Maye felt the pieces beginning to fall into place. This wasn't an isolated vendetta. It was a pattern of targeted retaliation. And that's not all, Daniel continued. I pulled property ownership records. Turns out Judge Whitaker's wife and brother jointly own several parcels of land that directly benefit from the rezoning projects approved after your town hall meeting. The same projects your criticism threatened to disrupt. Maye closed her eyes briefly, the weight of the revelation pressing down on her. Financial conflicts of interest. Abuse of judicial authority. Manipulation of the system to protect private gain. He's been careful, Daniel added, but not perfect. These connections are buried beneath shell companies, but the ownership trails are there if you know where to look. You've done incredible work, Daniel, Maye said quietly. Now we need to package it. Organized, clear, and ready to present if they push me into court. Daniel's voice carried a quiet edge of determination. He doesn't realize who he's dealing with, Ms. Musk. He thinks you're just another citizen too scared to challenge him. He has no idea you were trained to think like a lawyer. Maye's smile was faint but fierce. That's what I'm counting on. She hung up and leaned back, staring at the growing stack of files spread across her table. The fear was still there, but something stronger had taken root alongside it. A calm, surgical resolve. Whitaker had been tightening his trap, but he had overlooked one crucial flaw. Maye Musk was no ordinary target. She had walked away from law years ago not because she was incapable, but because life demanded sacrifice. She had chosen to build a different kind of career, one rooted in service, compassion, and public good. But the law had never left her. And now, as Whitaker wove his intricate web of power and intimidation, Maye was ready to unravel it, thread by careful thread. The battle lines were drawn, and for the first time, she no longer felt like the one being hunted. She was preparing to become the hunter. The quiet hum of Maye Musk's desk lamp filled the late-night silence as papers covered every inch of her dining table. Legal documents, court transcripts, property filings, licensing board letters, and handwritten notes sat organized in carefully labeled stacks. The storm was approaching fast, but Maye was no longer bracing for it. She was preparing to meet it head-on. The timeline had to be flawless. Every detail had to hold. She began at the very beginning, laying out the path step by step. October 1st. Traffic stop. Citation issued for a rolling stop violation. October 2nd. Fine paid online. Payment confirmation received. No further communication. Then, days later, an unexplained alteration in the court's database appeared, shifting her status to appearance required with no notice delivered. Days after that, contempt of court charges were filed for failure to appear. The timeline was clear. The manipulation of the records had occurred only after the town hall meeting, after she had publicly criticized Judge Whitaker. She highlighted each date, cross-referencing the court's public system with the payment system logs that Daniel had obtained. Each entry told a story, one of deliberate retroactive sabotage. And that was only the beginning. The pattern Whitaker had built extended beyond her case. Daniel had come through with his research, sending her a detailed report earlier that day. 7 other individuals, all with similar stories. They had spoken out against city development projects or filed public complaints against decisions that favored Whitaker's allies. In each case, a minor legal infraction was quietly escalated into something far more serious. Contempt charges, license reviews, financial penalties. And like her, every one of them had quietly settled, resigned, or disappeared from public view. The web was bigger than she'd feared. But it was no longer invisible. Maye carefully inserted Daniel's report into her growing legal brief. She labeled it "Pattern of Retaliation." Every case reinforced her argument that this was not random enforcement of the law but a systematic abuse of power for personal protection. Hours passed unnoticed as Maye cross-referenced legal statutes with case law. Procedural rules for contempt charges were clear. Service of summons required proof of actual delivery. None existed in her file. Rule 7.3 was specific. Certified mail or personal service only. The court had no such proof because none had ever been issued. That procedural violation alone could collapse Whitaker's case against her if presented correctly. Her phone buzzed suddenly, cutting through her concentration. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. "I have a problem," he said the moment she answered. "The main file I pulled from the court system's audit log, the one showing when your record was modified, crashed during transfer. The file is corrupted. I tried to recover it, but everything scrambled." Maye's pulse quickened. That file was crucial. It contained the digital fingerprints of whoever accessed her record after payment was completed. Without it, proving tampering would be significantly harder. "Is there any backup?" she asked, her voice tight. Daniel exhaled. "The copy I sent you earlier was only partial. The full access log got wiped. I don't know how. I'm still trying to salvage what I can." Maye stood from her chair, pacing slowly, thinking. "Wait. The night you first pulled that file, you sent me your preliminary export, right?" "Yes, but that version was incomplete." "It's better than nothing," Maye said. "Let me check something." She rushed to her personal laptop, opening the email attachment Daniel had sent days ago. There it was, the partial export. She quickly scanned through the entries, her eyes locking onto a key timestamp. October 9th. Manual status update. User ID code matching the administrative login assigned to Whitaker's clerk. Even without the full audit trail, this entry alone was powerful. "Daniel," she said, breath steadying, "I have the partial copy. The modification date and user ID are intact. It's not as strong as the full file, but it's admissible. Combined with the paper records, it may be enough." Daniel let out a long breath. "That's a relief. I'll keep working on retrieving the corrupted file in case we can restore more before the hearing." Even without it, Maye whispered, "We've got momentum. Now I need to focus on my delivery." She closed the call and stared at the growing binder in front of her. It was nearly ready. The evidence was solid. The legal arguments were sound. But Maye knew that winning in court would depend on more than just paperwork. It would come down to how she presented it. For years, she had stood before audiences of patients, healthcare boards, and public officials, breaking down complex nutrition science into language that resonated with people's lives. She had learned how to hold a room, how to project calm authority without aggression, how to make facts impossible to ignore. Now, she needed those skills in the courtroom. As the clock crept toward midnight, Maye stood before her living room mirror, holding her notes like a lecturer preparing for the most important class of her life. She practiced each point aloud, adjusting her tone, rehearsing pauses, perfecting the rhythm of her argument. She anticipated Whitaker's objections, imagined his dismissive tone, and crafted responses that would cut through his condescension without escalating into open conflict. Respectful but firm. Unshakable but never emotional. The judge expects fear. I will give him none. Her reflection stared back at her. A woman who had raised 3 children alone after losing everything. A woman who had rebuilt her life not once, but twice. A woman who understood both the fragility and resilience of those who refused to bow to power. By the time the first rays of dawn crept across her window, the final brief sat completed on the table. Every document had been cross-referenced, every argument rehearsed. The trap Whitaker had spent years building was about to be dismantled. And when she walked into that courtroom, she would not be the one on trial. Not anymore. The courtroom buzzed with low voices as the clock struck 9. Maye Musk stood near the defendant's table, clutching her worn leather briefcase, its edges scuffed from years of careful use. Her breathing was steady, her mind razor-sharp beneath the calm expression she wore. The moment she had prepared for was here. The machine Whitaker had set in motion was finally about to meet resistance. At the elevated bench, Judge Harold Whitaker entered, his robe flowing as he took his seat. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes briefly flickered toward May, sharp and assessing. This was supposed to be the final act of his carefully constructed drama. But today, the script was no longer entirely his. "Good morning, Ms. Musk," he began, voice dripping with exaggerated civility. "I see you have chosen to represent yourself in these proceedings." "I have, Your Honor," May replied evenly, meeting his gaze without the slightest tremor. "Very well," Whitaker said. "For the record, the court has assigned Prosecutor Benton as an assisting officer of the court for today's hearing. He will provide additional counsel for the bench." From the corner of her eye, May noticed the new face at the prosecutor's table. Benton, sharp-suited and cold-eyed, glanced at her briefly as if assessing the opponent he expected to dismantle easily. "The court recognizes the contempt charges filed against Ms. Musk for failure to appear as ordered. The facts, as they stand, are clear," Whitaker continued smoothly. "With respect, Your Honor," May said calmly, "I intend to challenge both the facts and the procedures that led to these charges. I request permission to present my evidence." "Proceed," Whitaker said, leaning back with an air of amused indulgence. May opened her briefcase and withdrew the first set of documents. She had rehearsed this countless times in front of her mirror, her tone practiced to remain respectful but unyielding. "Your Honor, the traffic citation in question was issued on October 1st. The fine was paid online on October 2nd, as documented here by the payment confirmation directly from the county system." She handed the paper to the clerk, who passed it up to Whitaker's bench. Whitaker barely glanced at it. "Payment of a fine does not negate a scheduled court appearance." May continued, unfazed. "That would be correct, Your Honor, if a court appearance had been scheduled. But the citation issued to me did not list any such requirement. The printed citation form indicates no mandatory appearance box was checked, and no court date was assigned." She slid the original copy of the citation across the table for the clerk to deliver. Around the courtroom, a few attorneys watching the hearing exchanged quiet glances. Prosecutor Benton leaned forward. "Ms. Musk, surely you understand that not all appearance orders are printed on the citation itself. Notices are sometimes issued separately." "That leads to my next point," May replied, her tone sharpening slightly. "I never received any such notice. No certified mail. No personal service. No email. No phone call. And under Municipal Rule 7.3, service of summons for contempt proceedings requires documented proof of delivery." Whitaker's face remained composed, but his eyes narrowed faintly. "Ms. Musk, this court operates under established procedures. Records indicate that notification was issued." May nodded, as if inviting him into the trap. "I would like to address those records, Your Honor." She retrieved another document and handed it to the clerk. "This is a partial export from the court's audit log, secured shortly after I discovered the altered status in my file." She paused for effect, allowing the moment to settle before continuing. "As you can see, my file was manually updated on October 9th, after my payment was processed, to reflect a required appearance that was not part of the original citation. The user ID attached to that change belongs to your own administrative clerk." A brief silence spread across the room. Whitaker's jaw tightened. His voice lowered, the condescension now laced with irritation. "You seem quite confident in your interpretation of court records, Ms. Musk. But you are not an attorney. You are a nutritionist. Perhaps you should refrain from lecturing this court on legal standards." May's voice never wavered. "You're correct, Your Honor. I am not a practicing attorney. But I did graduate summa cum laude from law school before dedicating my career to public health. My education remains sufficient to understand due process and procedural integrity." The subtle murmur in the gallery grew louder. Even Benton shifted slightly, sensing the direction this was heading. May pressed forward, her voice steady but gaining momentum. "Beyond my own case, Your Honor, I have also compiled documentation of 7 prior cases where contempt charges were filed against individuals who had publicly challenged city development projects or policies financially tied to your known associates. The timing of these charges consistently followed public dissent, forming a clear pattern of retaliatory prosecution." Whitaker's face flushed faintly for the first time. That accusation borders on contempt itself, Ms. Musk. With respect, Your Honor, Maye said calmly, I have not yet reached the most serious matter. She retrieved one final file and set it on the clerk's table. This document outlines property records and shell company filings that trace financial interests connected to your wife and your brother. These interests directly benefit from rezoning approvals linked to the development projects that my public statements threatened to obstruct. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Several reporters scribbled furiously in their notepads. The tension in the room had shifted completely. Whitaker's voice dropped, low and sharp. Ms. Musk, you are dangerously close to defamation. On the contrary, Your Honor, Maye replied, her voice unwavering, I am prepared to submit a formal motion under Judicial Conduct Rule 2.11. Given the financial conflicts of interest and the appearance of bias established here, I am respectfully requesting your recusal from any further proceedings related to my case. The room fell completely silent. Whitaker stared at her, his composure cracking under the weight of her precision. You've prepared this motion? I have, Maye said, sliding a sealed envelope across the table. Should you deny this request, I am prepared to file an immediate interlocutory appeal under Hampton v. County Court, as the law permits when a judge refuses to recuse themselves under substantiated claims of bias. The silence was thick, broken only by the scratching of pens and the shifting of chairs. Prosecutor Benton remained frozen, now carefully distancing himself from the sinking ship. Whitaker's lips pressed into a thin, pale line. The entire courtroom now watched him, not just Maye, not just Benton, but the reporters, the attorneys, and the silent spectators whose eyes demanded to see which man he truly was beneath the robe. We will recess for 15 minutes, Whitaker finally announced, his voice tight with forced calm. He banged his gavel once, stood, and retreated quickly to his chambers, leaving behind a courtroom that had turned completely in Maye Musk's favor. For the first time since this battle had begun, the weight of power had shifted. The trap he had designed for her now closed firmly around him. Walter remained standing in the center of the VIP lounge long after Maye and Elon had disappeared through the sleek glass doors. The buzz of conversations resumed around him, but they sounded distant, as if muffled by an invisible wall that closed him off from the rest of the world. His companions hovered nearby, their eyes downcast, shifting uncomfortably as the weight of what had just unfolded pressed heavily upon them. For a moment, Walter's mind struggled to process the reality that had so thoroughly dismantled his confidence. The quiet woman he had mocked for hours was not some elderly passenger living off her child's generosity. She was Maye Musk, the mother of the very man he had so desperately hoped to impress. The very man whose approval he had assumed he was poised to secure. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. The aftertaste of arrogance lingered bitterly. Perhaps there was still time, he thought. Perhaps a gesture of humility could salvage something from the wreckage. He quickly straightened his jacket, adjusted his tie, and signaled subtly to Melissa, who was speaking softly with another attendant nearby. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice quieter than usual. "Miss, may I have a moment?" Melissa turned toward him with her usual composed professionalism, though her eyes betrayed the faintest hint of knowing anticipation. "Of course, Mr. Kingsley," she said. Walter took a small step closer, lowering his voice. "I realize. I may have spoken rather carelessly earlier."